Welcome to the CEC Report. It's the 17th of June. I'm Robert Barwick and I'm joined today by CEC leader Craig Isherwood. Welcome, Craig.
Yeah, thanks, Robbie.
In this week's CEC Report, why financial elites are panicked about Brexit, and Orlando attack is the legacy of the 28 pages cover-up of the Anglo-Saudi terrorist apparatus. So first, why financial elites are panicked about Brexit. Now, Craig, the breaking news this morning, this is Friday morning we record this, a British Member of Parliament has just been shot dead today, or overnight, our time. And she was a pro-Remain campaigner. So for the sake of the audience, Brexit is the vote that Britain's going to have in a few days to whether they leave or stay in the European Union. So the pro-leave campaign is called Brexit, and the Remain campaign is called Remain. So she's a Labor Member of Parliament. She's a Remain campaigner, and this is a massive shock that this person has walked up to her and
just killing an MP in the first place is a
of course,
massive shock.
It's enormous. Now we have to mention that because we're talking about this subject. We plan to talk about this subject anyway. This could be a game changer. We don't know. Certainly some people in the Remain campaign want it to be a game changer, but that's all we'll say about that. If more information comes out later that's relevant, we'll report that. But the audience will have, by the time they see this, will have heard the news, I'm sure, and you'll see lots of different reporting on it. So it's a huge shock. The reason we're talking about Brexit on the CEC report, though, here in Australia is because we know quite a bit about it, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But it started to dominate the news this week, even here.
Yeah, well, Malcolm Turnbull weighed in on it this week, saying it'd be a bad thing if the UK left the European Union. You've had
Bill Shorten, likewise.
Barack Obama. I mean, this has been a subject that's actually come up in our own media. So.
Oh, exactly. And this week, markets started crashing. Now, when I say started, markets fluctuate like crazy, but this week's market crashes midweek were blamed on panic over Brexit. And that's the part that's the key, because people are going to be nervous about what is this unknown Brexit, what does it mean? And that's why we're going to talk about this subject.
Now that doesn't mean, Robbie, that Brexit is the cause of the markets crashing. No. It means that it's the way that people can, the establishment, the City of London who run the European Union, can actually panic people into thinking that leaving Brexit is a bad idea.
And you mentioned
leaving the European Union is a bad idea.
Yeah, you mentioned people like Obama. All the world's leading financial institutions, such as the IMF, central banks, World Bank, OECD, Bank for International Settlements, these organisations have all come out and said Brexit would be a bad idea, right? And so that's why we called this segment Why Financial Elites Are Panicked About Brexit, and they want the rest of us to be panicked as well.
But the problem they've got, Robbie, is that this is a referendum of the people.
Oh.
So therefore the people are going to have a say about, in a sense, it's not just taking the temperature, but it's allowing the people to say, what do we think about this existing structure that we have, the EU, the financial system, the City of London, and the whole works? So they're being put on the spot.
And Craig, I've seen some otherwise reasonable people say, I'll paraphrase, but this blatantly, this is the problem with democracy.
Yes.
You get people who don't have a clue, having to vote on things that affect important financial institutions, right? Well, I'll just make this comment on that particularly. We've spent 15 years going around the world invading countries, always in the name of democracy, right? But the elites behind those wars, they don't want democracy. They want something that they can control and nothing more, and occasionally something like this happens. So here's what we're going to say about it. Why are people so worried about this? There was the EU's leaders, who were unelected, by the way, Craig, one of them came out this week and said, Brexit will be, get this, the end of civilization as we know it.
As they know it.
As they know it, that's right, as they know it. So why? Well, what is the European Union? We have produced an article on this, which we've called London Still Runs the EU, and viewers can call in on our toll-free number and get a free copy of that. The toll-free number's on the screen. in that article, Craig, we call the European Union a fascist monstrosity. Right? Now, it was sold to the public of Europe. The way it was sold and the way it's presented around the world is this was something that developed after World War II as a way to stop European wars. That was the line. That was the selling point. That was the advertising. However, the people who created it, that's not what they did. They created this institution, the EU, in order to take financial arrangements between London and Wall Street and the Nazis, in fact, in Germany, and preserve those arrangements for Europe as a whole after the war, which institutionalised the power of London and Wall Street and these Nazi, because the Nazis were backed by some of the most powerful banks in Europe, like Lazard and banks like that, preserve those arrangements, but they needed a technocratic structure outside of the reach of democracy to actually do it, right? And you get people to sign, you get countries to sign treaties and participate in this stuff, and each time give away more and more sovereignty to do it. And what's ended up resulting is the EU as we know it today. And if you don't think it's fascist, look at what the EU has done in since the 2008 crisis in southern Europe, in Greece, Italy, Spain, Portugal, and even Ireland. They have actually overthrown governments. They've replaced democratically elected governments in Greece and Italy and installed non-elected governments in order to ram through their demands that those countries submit to the most brutal austerity you can imagine, right? Slashing pensions by 2/3 in Italy and Greece and stuff like that. To do it, they couldn't do it democratically.
I find it really ironic, Robbie, because we get accused of having conspiracy theories. But it's the British Empire, it's the British oligarchy in the City of London that have always been pushing for the idea of a world government.
Yep.
And what the EU represent is the first pass of a world government, a centralised dictatorship of an unelected technocracy.
It's the model
for
what they want the world government to be.
So they've destroyed countries. They've taken countries' currencies away from them, like Greece. Therefore, they've got no actual sovereignty anymore because all that currency is dictated through the centralised European monetary union and so forth. And you've actually got the equivalent of a top-down fascist operation where the people of the country have no real say in what actually happens to them. Now, people say, oh, we get a bit of choice here and there, but no, if you look at it from top-down, and this is what Britain's looking at, when it looks at its own problems, the immigration issue at the moment, where you've got millions of people coming into Europe, Britain is using that as an issue to say, oh, no, we want to be able to control our own immigration policy. Well, under the EU, they actually can't.
No.
And that's one of the issues.
And it's not, just to clarify a little bit, it's not, because even on this show in the last few weeks, we've clarified that we personally oppose the idea of being anti-immigration, especially you got to actually be humanitarian towards refugees. What's really got up the people of Britain's noses is even less this refugee wave, but the fact that under the EU rules there's free movement across borders within the EU, and so the EU expanded aggressively eastward after the fall of the Soviet Union for strategic reasons, not for economic reasons, for strategic reasons, under the umbrella of NATO as another way of confronting Russia. And all these former Soviet bloc countries joined that are very poor. Instead of doing the sorts of things that Lyndon LaRouche called for after the fall of the Soviet Union, which was helping develop Eastern Europe, right, economically through infrastructure, etc., those people remain poor, so they've flooded in waves from Poland and Romania into the UK as cheap labour, right? And so the British people, they just see their economy is being, like they don't have jobs, etc. And unfortunately, it's easy to blame it on your fellow man. It's not the individual migrant's fault, right? It's the City of London and the people. There are rich people in the UK that are taking advantage of this cheap labour, right? So this helped fuel, though, this demand that we've got to do something about this. And this party rose up, UKIP, and David Cameron said, okay, well, they started getting votes. Okay, we have to settle this thing. Let's have a referendum. And they thought they could control the outcome, and they actually can't. And I'll tell you one of the reasons they can't, Craig. We've seen the polls change dramatically. The longer the campaign's gone on, it went from being most people in favour of remaining because a bit of a fear of the unknown, to level pegging, and now most people in favour of Brexit because they're not buying the argument of the Remain campaign. The Remain campaign argument is this. Essentially, David Cameron's argument is, Brexit, if we leave the EU, it will damage our strong economy. And the people hearing this are going, what strong economy? Right? We don't get this at all. So what we've done in this article, Craig, that people can read is show how this institution with these undemocratic powers was a creation itself of the City of London from the beginning, right? So if they vote to leave, that is the beginning of the end for it's not just Britain will leave it and that'll be the end of it. No. Other countries are going to say, well, all right, we hadn't thought about this until now. Like, we've preferred to stay in the EU, but countries like Greece and Italy are going to start thinking, well, why are we staying in and being dictated to, right? And there's going to be a growing call for that.
That's where you've got the global financial system right now, Robbie, in the transatlantic area on a knife edge.
Yep.
You've got massive debt, quadrillions of dollars, 2 quadrillions of dollars of derivatives, speculation. So once you start to get a crack happening, once the UK leaves, and we suspect that it will, it means the other countries are going to say, well, what's the point of being part of this dictatorship? I mean, look at Greece and how it's been smashed, right? Once that all breaks up, you're going to have enormous ramifications for the financial system, and therefore you're going to get the voices like Jeremy Corbyn that are saying, we don't need the City of London, let's get rid of it.
And how would they do that?
Well, first you have to realise that the City of London is a separate entity all by itself. It's a separate governing entity. It's actually not part of the United Kingdom. So you'd have to abolish that whole idea and get rid of the City of London as a separate entity.
Bring that under democratic
Nationalise
control
the Bank of England, right? Bring it under the control of the government to issue credit, go with Glass-Steagall and a whole raft of policies that have to deal with a financial catastrophe that's about to unfold.
Yep.
And this is what's unfolding. They can see this coming. And they're saying, we don't want, this is terrifying for us because we're going to lose our power. We're going to lose the political power. And then you've got someone like Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell who are representing these sorts of policies in the wings of the Labor Party. The people are going to rise up and look for other alternatives. What have you got on the other side? You've got Tony Blair, who's a war criminal, comes out speaking for Remain. David Cameron, of course, who's known for his very pathetic and terrible austerity policies.
John Major, the guy that wanted to get him into the euro.
And he's one of the original architects of this whole thing. So the point is that you've got these sorts of dynamics that the Remain campaign are terrified about unleashing. It's going to happen anyway, Robbie, because there's no way without dealing with the global financial situation. It's not.
Stay in or out, they're going to have to deal with that.
And this is the policies exist in the UK through the Corbyn faction at the moment in order to deal with this, and that's what they're terrified about.
Well, call in, like I said, if you want our analysis of what this means, because it's going to have global implications, call in and get a copy of this article. The City of London still runs the EU. Let's take a break, and after the break we're going to talk about terrorism. Welcome back to the CEC Report. Orlando terrorist attack is the legacy of the suppressed 28 pages. Now, we've just had this terrible, shocking mass slaughter in Orlando, Florida, Craig. What I want to do now is play for the viewer a clip from a press conference given in January 2015, just as the news came through in the United States of the Paris Charlie Hebdo attack, right, where the Charlie Hebdo cartoonist got slaughtered. And this is from Bob Graham. Now, Senator Bob Graham is the author of the US Congress's Joint Congressional Inquiry into 9/11, the report, and that report included 28 pages on the financing of the 9/11 terrorist attack. The whole report was released except those 28 pages. And he has led the campaign to have those 28 pages released because those 28 pages detail how the money for the 9/11 attack came from one source, Saudi Arabia. And the people, this particular Saudi royals involved in it, were the people in business with BAE Systems in the United Kingdom, Britain's biggest defence contractor, on who's in this thing called the Al Yamama arms deal we talk about here a lot. People can look it up and call in for our literature on it. And they're friends of Prince Charles, who negotiates the Al Yamama arms deal with the Saudis on behalf of BAE Systems, right? The Saudis named in this 28 pages are the friends of Prince Charles. So Senator Graham's been campaigning for these pages to be released, and he makes a very important point. I'll just paraphrase it now, but you can listen to his own words, that the reason that there's an ongoing wave of terrorism since 9/11 is because those 28 pages have been suppressed, which identify the source of the terrorism. So just have a quick look at this.
The third consequence is the issue of national security. And frequently those who have defended non-disclosure have said this cannot be made available to the American people because it will be adverse to our national security. It will affect methods and sources of information or other information that is inappropriate to be made publicly known. As the two congressmen have just said, they both read the report, not 12 years ago as I participated in writing the report, but they have read it recently and have both come to the same conclusion that we did a dozen years ago, that there is no threat to national security in disclosure. I'm going to make the case today that there's a threat to national security by non-disclosure, and we saw another chapter of that today in Paris. Here are some facts. The Saudis know what they did. They are not persons who are unaware of the consequences of their government's actions. Second, the Saudis know that we know what they did. Somebody in the federal government has read these 28 pages. Someone in the federal government has read all the other documents that have been covered up so far. And the Saudis know that. What would you think the Saudis' position would be if they knew what they had done, they knew what the United States knew what they had done, and they also observed that the United States had taken a position of either passivity or actual hostility to letting those facts be known? What would the Saudi government do in that circumstance, which is precisely where they have been for more than a decade? Well, one, they have continued, maybe accelerated their support for one of the most extreme forms of Islam, Wahhabism, throughout the world, particularly in the Middle East. And second, they have supported their religious fervor with financial and other forms of support of the institutions which were going to carry out those extreme forms of Islam. Those institutions have included mosques, madrasas, and military. Al-Qaeda was a creature of Saudi Arabia. The regional groups such as Al-Shabaab have been largely creatures of Saudi Arabia. And now ISIS is the latest creature. Yes, I hope and I trust that the United States will crush ISIS. But if we think that is the definition of victory, we are being very naive. ISIS is a consequence, not a cause. It is a consequence of the spread of extremism, largely by Saudi Arabia. And if it is crushed, there will be another institution established, financed, supported to carry on the cause. So the consequences of our passivity to Saudi Arabia have been that we have tolerated this succession of institutions, violent, extreme, extremely hurtful to the region of the Middle East, and a threat to the world, as we saw this morning in Paris.
All right, and that's quite conclusive, Craig. Right? He lays it out completely. So what we're going to do now is take a break. When we come back from the break, we're going to give you a bit of a profile on the killer in Orlando. And the point is, what this profile shows is he's not some lone nut, deranged guy, just stewing on homophobia and repressed homosexuality himself, etc. He's part of an apparatus that is intimately tied in with the same one that is in the 28 pages in 9/11. Welcome back to the CEC Report, where we're discussing Orlando attack is the legacy of the 28 pages cover-up of the Anglo-Saudi terror apparatus. So let me quickly go through a profile of the Orlando killer, because the big contradiction here is this guy was cleared 4 times, twice by his company and twice by the FBI, even though he was under suspicion from the things he was saying, right, making radical statements. He was cleared 4 times to be able to carry a concealed weapon because of the job he had. So his name is Omar Mateen, and the key thing about him is he worked for the giant British private security firm G4S, Group 4 Securitas. The Brits are the world's leaders in private security, and they've long been pushing, outfits like this have pushed for them to be a replacement for public policing and even national armies, Craig. And it's actually, they've even talked about going back to the old feudal model. Interestingly for Australians, the main rival for G4S is Serco, another similar British company. And of course, Serco runs our detention centres here in Australia and private prisons, etc.
So we're talking about army security forces run by private boardrooms and not by national governments.
Exactly. That's what they want. And this G4S is the 3rd biggest employer in the world, over 600,000 employees. Mateen is in the middle of 2 intersecting security apparatuses and intelligence apparatuses. One is this British military industrial complex, and the other is the Anglo-American backed Afghan Mujahideen networks that in the 80s spawned Al-Qaeda. So that first, his father, Mateen's father, is an Afghan Mujahideen in the 80s, i.e. the people that the CIA and MI5 put up to fight the Soviets in Afghanistan. In 85, he was able to move to the US, which most people think means he was probably a CIA agent himself, being able to do that. In the US, he has remained active in networks and Afghan politics, and we'll put a picture on the screen now showing him at a British embassy function in Washington, D.C. in January 2015 with 2 unidentified British defence attaches, right? So pretty well connected guy, and there's lots of other, on this particular site, there's lots of other pictures like that. This network that his father's part of overlaps the leading neocon networks in the US, which were the people that turned 9/11 into the excuse to unleash regime change in the Middle East, right? Back to the Group 4 G4S though. G4S is intimately intertwined with the Anglo-Saudi apparatus that is in the 28 pages. The director of G4S director Steve Mogford was the chief operating officer for BAE Systems from 2000 to 2007. They're the ones involved in the Al Yamama arms deal. Another G4S director, Tim Weller, is currently the chief financial officer for a group called Petrofac, which is run by people that are tied up with the regime change plot in Syria, right? Closely tied in with that, and intertwined with things like Chatham House, which is the Queen's think tank in the United Kingdom. G4S provides security for the annual Hajj in Saudi Arabia. This is a huge contract for the huge event. Millions of people go to this Hajj in Saudi Arabia. Mateen went to Saudi twice, in 2011 when G4S first won the contract, and then again in 2012. And then from what we can say, from what we've heard just briefly, at some point in this period working for G4S, he underwent a personality change. We'll do more on this, but Craig, there's enough to tell you that he is not just a deranged lone nut stewing away, decides to answer an ISIS call. Do you agree with Bob Graham?
Well, the key is in the 28 pages for sure, Robbie, because that's the funding is the key. The fact that it's all been redacted, never been released, shows you that that's where the monkey sleeps, so to speak.
Yep.
Lift that veil of secrecy, and a lot of questions and solutions be found.
Call in for a free copy of our literature on this. But we're out of time. Thanks for tuning into this week's CEC Report.
You've been watching the CEC Report, the weekly TV show of the Citizens Electoral Council of Australia. What can people do to find out more, Robert?
Well, they can get on our website, www.cecaust.com.au, or they can call our toll-free number for Lisa to order a copy of this, the Australian Alert Service, which is our weekly publication where we write up all the material we use. That number is 1-800-636-432.